Hello and welcome back to Let's Build a Graflex. On today's episode we are going to be assembling our main LED. The tools that you are going to need for this are going to be a electric static safe soldering iron, some snips of different styles. These ones are nice because they have the strippers right in the jaws for stripping different size wire. They go from 20 gauge all the way up to the small teeny tiny little 30 gauge that we're going to be using today. You can also use this style snip, great for getting in tight areas. You're going to need some solder. Now I have some very small solder here, and it is actually, for anyone wondering, it is a, let's zoom in, it is a 32 thousandths diameter 6040 rosin core solder. It just comes in a big spool and it sits right in my soldering station, and I found that this works really well. You're also going to need wire. We're going to be using 30 gauge on this Graflex 2.0. The chassis channels are really tight, so the 30 gauge is incredibly small and it works really well. So we're going to be using some of that, so make sure you have wire. And you're going to need your heatsink and optic holder. Now, as you can see, there are a couple different styles here. On the left we have the Custom Saber Shop's new version that they just came out with. I prefer this one myself, but you can use this style. This one is from a store by the name of Saber Bay on Etsy.com. It's a little simpler design, but it works just as well. With this one, you have your heatsink and your optic holder all in one, and you just take your regular Cree. You can just drop it right in. As you can see, it's not really sitting very flush. You may have to trim down the edges of the Cree a little bit to get it to fit. As you can see, some of these corners are very sharp, but if you just take a small file or some sandpaper or even a Dremel and round those off, it will drop right into the heatsink without a problem. You're also going to need your star thermal pad to go at the bottom of it. You can either use that, or today what I'm going to be using is some Arctic Silver 5 thermal paste. This is often used for computers, for CPUs, for gluing it between the CPU itself and the heatsink on top of the CPU. It's great for thermal conductivity. Works really well. So I'm going to be using this just because I prefer it over the thermal pad. The thermal pad can kind of be a pain in the ass sometimes. So either or, it's up to you. But with the, we'll just go over this one real quick. With the Saber Bay version, like I said, you're going to want to trim down some of those sharp corners just a little bit to get it to fit. What you can do is solder your LED. Solder all your wires. You're going to want to run them through the center hole, not through the side holes like you may have seen in other people's videos. Those were a 1/8 inch heatsink, and they had the holes on the sides for the wires to go through. With this style, obviously you can see there's just one hole, so you're just going to want to run your wires through there. So what you're going to want to do is solder all of your wires to your pad, run them through the center hole. Apply either your thermal paste or your thermal pad down underneath the LED. You're going to want to put that down, press the LED into place for a good 30 seconds to really let the adhesive bond, and then you're going to glue your optic in place on top of the LED, which there are these 3 holes here and 3 legs. Just going to line them up like that, and your optic's going to sit down over it. Now you're also going to want, if you're using this style, you're going to need some E6000. That is what you're going to put on the bottom of the legs to keep them to keep the optic glued to the LED. Just a small dab of E6000 on the legs before you drop it into place on top of the LED, and that will keep it nice and secure. That's one of the reasons I don't really care for this style. I've used it in previous builds, but I don't like how the LED has the option or the capability to just kind of pop out, or the optic has the potential to fall out. I don't really care for that too much. It works, and there's nothing against the design, but the one that the Custom Saber Shop came up with is a little better in my opinion, and that's why we're going to be using that one today. So we have here all of the pieces we're going to need, along with our Arctic Silver 5. Now with this one, this is more of the traditional style. Again, just a single center hole. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to wire your LED up. And as you can see, we have a modified LED. When you buy this heatsink, the Custom Saber Shop also sells modified LEDs. Now the only thing modified about it is the base itself. As you can see, they rounded the base for you. You can do that yourself to these. You can get a regular LED and you can just use a Dremel and round off the edges. Obviously you're not going to damage anything if you do it carefully. If you don't hit anything, it is possible. So you would wire up your LED, which I will demonstrate in just a little bit. Run all your wires through the center hole once again, and then run them through the center hole of your actual heat sink here. And we're going to be applying just 3 small dabs of Arctic Silver 5 underneath each LED die, and then we're going to run it down, and we're just going to stick it right to the LED, right to the heat sink, and then we're going to drop our optic into place, just like so, and we're going to thread on. As you can see, the optic holder itself is threaded, and so is the outside diameter of the heatsink. So you just drop this right over the top and thread this right on. You can put your finger in there and just twist it. And just twist until it stops. Now as you can see, there's a lip on the top of the optic holder, and that optic is now locked in place. So as it threads in, it captures the optic, it captures the LED, nothing's going to move. You have these 2 tiny little indents here to put a screwdriver or something in to really crank it down a little bit, and I will demonstrate that later too. But that's really why I prefer this style. It's more enclosed, more durable, less to worry about, and it just really works well. So for now, we'll just unthread this again. So again, if you decide to get the Custom Saber Shop style, you can get just a regular LED, but keep in mind that you will have to modify it, or you can just get their modified LED, which is what this is. This one's already been modified, so it saves you the hassle. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to wire up our LED. Okay, I have my LED set up in my little hobby vise here. It's clamped in. It will move a little bit since it has been rounded off. It's not a real firm grasp, but you just want it stable enough to not move. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pre-tin all of our pads for the LED wiring. It helps make soldering a lot faster if they're pre-tinned. So I'm just going to pre-tin the tip of my soldering iron here. Actually, I'm going to clean that up. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to apply the tip. I've got my my soldering iron set to about 325 degrees Celsius, that is. And I'm just going to heat this pad up first. I'm just going to apply some heat to the pad itself. You can even go from the underside. As heat rises, Heat does not sink, heat rises. So if you heat the underside of the pad with the tip of the iron, the heat will transfer through the copper a little more evenly and heat that pad from the underside. Now copper is an amazing heat sink, so it's difficult to do this at first without practice, because the copper dissipates all the heat really quickly. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to try this. I'm just going to dab just a little bit of solder. I'm going to pre-tin my tip. Always pre-tin the tip. I'm just going to dab it right on here. As you can see, that pad, if my camera will focus, obviously it doesn't want to. But as you can see, I have a nice little dab of solder, not too much, but I have a nice little dab of solder on that pad. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just move on to the next one. Okay, so as you can see, I have pre-tinned these two pads. They look alright. It's kind of hard to do it with the camera in my way, but I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these off camera, and we'll come back after I have these all tinned up. Okay, now we have all of our pads tinned up. It's a lot easier to do off camera, but they have just a small amount of solder covering each pad. You don't want to gob it on, you don't want to put too much. Make sure that they're nice and just evenly applied, and that's basically about it. Just even heat, even pressure while you're doing it. You don't want to burn them, you don't want to hit the soldering tip against the dies themselves. So now that we have these pre-tinned, we can go ahead and we can cut our wires. Now if we look at our wiring diagram here, you can see that coming from the board, from our battery and our main LED positive and negative to each of our dies. So we have our two blue dies and we have our white die. And it looks like all three positives are going to share a common positive wire. We're going to split off and do a couple of resistors, and we'll go over that in a little bit. But they're each going to get a red wire. So we can cut three long red wires, and then our two blues are going to share a negative. So we can cut our green wires. And our flash on clash white is going to get its own negative that's going to go all the way back to the flash on clash pad. So let's go ahead and cut those wires now and get ready to solder those on. Alright, I have all my wires cut. I have my three red positives, I have my two green negatives for my blue dies, and I have my purple negative for my flash on clash. Now you can use any color wire you want. Wire color does not have to mean anything. These are just the wires that I pick. I usually stick with red for positives, black or green for most of my negatives, and purple is just it helps remind me that purple is flash on clash. I don't know why. It's just the one I always use. So I have some very long wire strands here because they do have to go all the way back to the board, and like I said, I like to have extra. So now that we have all of our wires cut, what we can do is we can cut the sheathing off of them, and we can solder them to the LED in the proper places. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, as we can see, I have my wire here, my red wire, leaning across my positive pad. Now I have pre-tinned the pad, and I also pre-tinned the wire itself. Now I have it lying across the center because it's going to be feeding through the hole. Now when you solder on, you don't want a lot of excess wire hanging off the back. You want to keep it nice and clean, and have your sheathing go right up against the pad. You don't want bare wire stripped all the way back to here. That's not going to be good. Any excess that hangs over we can trim off after, but for soldering we want to have the sheathing go right up to the joint. It helps it stay nice and secure. The more sheathing, the stronger it will be. So now that we have our pad and our wire tinned, I'm going to take my soldering iron. I'm just going to get a little bit of solder just to help me out. I'm just going to lay the tip right across Now I have pre-tinned this tip. I'll just clean it up and do it again so you can see. I have my nice clean tip. I'm just going to apply just a little bit of solder to it. Now I'm just going to lightly touch the soldering iron to the solder joint. That looks pretty good. Maybe just dab more heat. And that's it. Simple as that. Release the helping hands. As you can see, that is a sturdy solder joint. That's not going to go anywhere. I'm not too worried about the excess hanging off. If we were, I can just take this out. Hopefully my camera will focus. Doesn't want to. Let me zoom out just a little bit. There we go. So as you can see, that's a decent solder joint. It's not going anywhere. It's not a cold joint. The sheathing goes right up to it, so that's nice and secure. So I do have just a little bit of excess wire hanging off the back edge of it. So what I can do is I can just trim that right off. And that's not bad. I don't really care for that little booger thing sticking up. So you can either heat that back up and just melt that flat. I'm not really going to worry about it, but that is basically all you do to solder your wires on. So now each positive will get a red wire. As you can see, we have two blue dies which appear white, and the white die actually looks yellow. So you can see that we have the positive and negative for each pad. Positive, negative, positive, negative. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is solder the rest of these together. Okay, and we're back. I've gone ahead and soldered all of my wires on. I have my 3 red positives, my 2 green negatives, and my purple negative for the flash on clash. Everything came out pretty decent. Looks pretty good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to test these and make sure that each of them works. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to trim some of the sheathing off of the other ends of the wires. And as you can see, I have very long wires because they do have to go all the way back to the board. Better to have too much than too little. So I'm going to trim off a little bit, and then we're going to use the battery pack to connect some of these positives and negatives and make sure that the dies are working. It's also a good habit to do before you even solder on anything, is to check the die. Check each one just by pressing the battery pack to the pad to make sure that it's working, because if it's working before you solder it and then you solder everything up and it doesn't work, you know it's something you did. If not, otherwise you're questioning whether or not it was bad when you got it. So it's just a little precaution, little peace of mind. Okay, I have my battery test pack hooked up to the red positive lead to the yellow or the white die, and I'm just going to connect the negative now. This is going to be very bright, so watch your eyes. As you can see, it lights up. So we know that that die is good. We're going to move on to the next one here. And let's get one from our blues. That looks like that one there. Now all I'm doing when I connect these is I'm just taking the end of the red wire and I'm just simply pinching it in the alligator clip, and that's all I'm doing. We can take our green wire, which is the negative, to our blue, connect that up, and there's one blue die. So we know that that one works. So now we can take our other red wire to our blue die, connect that one, take our other green wire and connect this one up, and there you have that one. So now we know that all 3 dies work, so we know that everything's good and we can continue with the assembly. So now we can continue with our assembly. And some of you may have noticed that I'm wiring these, wiring the LED in parallel, where each wire, or I should say each LED gets its own wire. You can run them in series, in which case you would have one positive going to one, and then the positive from that one would just jump over to the other positive, and that wire would jump over to that one. You can do it that way, but I prefer to have each of my positive wires resistored on its own, rather than all 3 dies sharing a single resistor. My 2 blues are going to each have its own resistor, so I wanted each one to have its own wire. Each one is going to have its own resistor on it, and then after the resistor, between the resistor and the board, it will go back to a single wire. So we'll have one positive wire coming out of the board for the LED, and it's going to actually split into 3 wires. But for right now, we can just go ahead and assemble our heatsink. So what we're going to want to do is just kind of gather all your wires together. Actually, you know what? First thing you want to do is you're going to want to clean your heatsink and the bottom of the LED pad. That way the thermal paste really sticks to it very well, and it cleans the microscopic pores of the metal, so that as it heats up, the thermal paste will properly fill in those microscopic holes and help with heat dissipation even more. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just take some rubbing alcohol on a clean rag. I have here just a clean rag. Like I said in the assembly video, some paper towel, something like that will work, something lint free. We're just going to put just a little bit of alcohol on the rag. I'm just going to wipe down the surface. That looks pretty good, pretty lint free. You're not going to want to touch that because it's going to get all of the oils from your hands all over it. So now we can go ahead and carefully just clean up the bottom of the LED. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Focus. Pretty clean, lint free, not bad. So now we're just going to take our strands of wire. They're not all equal lengths. My red stop a little bit shorter, but we're just going to take them. We're going to feed them through the center hole of the heatsink, just like that. Pull them through. Take my red wires and feed those through as well. Now we are going to be properly wrapping these, or I should say we will be twisting these together to make them nice and even, not even, but nice and tidy. We will be twisting these together in just a moment. So now the key with the thermal paste is you want to just pull it off just a little bit. Take your thermal paste, pull the cap off. Now, as you can see, it's just a liquid paste you're going to put on. Now when you're doing computer CPUs, all you need is like drop the size of a pea right in the center of the CPU, because that's where the cores of the CPU are, and that's where it generates all the heat. So for this, we have 3 sources of heat. Each die is going to generate heat. So we're going to go down, and we're just going to put a very small dab. Whoops. very small dab underneath each LED. Clean up the excess. If it gets on other places, it's not that big of a deal. Squeeze out just a little more. Now our next die is over here. I'm just going to put a small dab right there. Gather up the excess. Move our wires out of the way. And another small dab under this one. Now when this compresses and you put the LED down against the heatsink, it's going to squish all of this material, all of this paste. It's going to smush it all the way around, and it should line up pretty evenly. That's why you don't need a lot, because it will flatten, it will squeeze out of all kinds of different orifices. So for right now, we have our 3 dabs. What we can do is we can bring up our heatsink here, pull the wires nice and tight, and we can anchor this down and apply some nice even pressure right to the middle, and it'll really squish out the paste. As you can see, like right there, it's squishing out through the sides, which means it's good. As long as it's really underneath the dies, that's the most important part, and we know it is because that's where we made sure to put our dots. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and drop our optic on, line up the holes, drop the optic on, and we can thread on the optic holder. Pinch the bottom of it in the lens and just spin it right on. Tighten it down, apply decent pressure. Now, like I said, you can take a small screwdriver. That's actually too big. I'm just going to take an Allen key here. Take an Allen key, fit it right in the hole, and just put sideways pressure going that way to tighten it down, and that'll work just fine. And as you can see, it's nice and tight. It doesn't rattle. It's nice and tight, not going to come loose. And you're pretty much good. And that is the assembly of the LED. So now you have your complete LED. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to twist these all together. And then we're going to route them inside of our chassis. And we're going to see where the wires are going to need to sit for our resistors, and we're actually going to solder our resistors on now as well. And when the time comes, I will walk you through how to choose the proper resistor for whichever LED die you're using. Okay, what I've gone ahead and done is I've twisted all my 3 positive wires together. I haven't twisted them all the way back because I'm going to be soldering some resistors on in just a second. I twisted my 3 negatives together, both greens for the blues and the purple for the white flash on clash. And what I also did was I tied the 2 greens together. I soldered them together, and I soldered them to just one. That's kind of hard to see against the bat. I soldered them to one lead. Now this one lead is all that's going to go to the board. It's just easier to have only one one wire on the pad rather than a whole bunch of them. So I went ahead and did that, and as you can see, I just heat shrunk it. So that's going to take care of our negatives. Now, you're going to want to make sure that this solder joint is in the right place. And the way you can do that is just line up your heat sink where it's going to go, stretch the wire out, and as you can see, I have my heat shrink where it ties in right about at the end of the chassis. And we know that if we insert our chassis just a little bit, this is where our board's going to sit, but when we solder it, our board is going to hang off to the side. That's going to make it easier to clamp it in the vise and things like that. So we're going to have our wire come to about there, and this wire here is going to go over to the pad, and the pad is going to sit about here, something like that. So we're going to solder that on, and then when we take the board and we put it back in here and we slide this chassis in, all this extra wire is going to slide in, and it's like I said, it's all going to get kind of bunched up, and we're going to slide the chassis all the way and it's going to click into place, and we're going to stuff all this inside the chassis, and then it's all going to get kind of bunched up right about here, and then we're going to just tuck it behind the speaker. But you want to make sure that you have enough that this solder joint isn't in a place where it's going to get caught. You don't want it too far back. It's going to get caught and pinched. You don't want to put too much stress on the solder joint. And you don't want too much in the back. So try and keep it, try and keep in mind where you're going to put it. I found that right about here is probably going to work pretty well. I'm going to try and line my resistors up with this same spot on the positives. So we can actually go ahead and do that and solder on our resistors to our positive wires. So before we go ahead and solder in our resistors, we need to know what kind of resistors we need to use. We need to figure out the demand of electric current and draw that the LED requires compared to the output of the battery and the board, so we don't fry the LED, we don't fry the board, anything like that. And there's a handy online calculator that helps you enter in the information from the LED and your power supply, and it tells you the recommended resistor. So I'm actually going to show you a quick walkthrough on the computer as how to do that, and we will be right back to the bench after we've figured out which resistor we need. Okay, now that we're back at the computer, we can go ahead and calculate our resistors. Now there's a couple of ways to do this. There's a more complicated way and there's a fairly simple way. I'm going to show you how to achieve both, and I'm going to show you how to do that using the internet. And the first way is going to be, if we load our web browser here, I'm going to go to Plector Labs first of all. PlectorLabs.com. They're the manufacturers of the Nano Biscotti version 3, and I'm going to go over to manuals and support on the left hand side, and I'm going to go down to the Nano Biscotti version 3 users manual, and I'm going to click on the Adobe Reader, and as you can see, it's going to open up my Nano Biscotti version 3 manual. Now, as I said in my first video, I highly recommend you download and print off this entire thing and keep it with you so that you have it for your entire build. There's a lot of very, very useful information in here. But what we're going to be focusing on today is resistor calculations. And the Nano Biscotti version 3 manual actually will tell us how to do that. If we scroll down to the table of contents and we look at the high power LED resistor calculations, we have resistor calculation on page number 11. So we're actually going to scroll down until we find, as you can see, the page numbers are at the bottom. So I'm going to scroll down to page 11, and I'm just going to go back up, and we have resistor calculation. Now, resistor calculation is basically the principle of Ohm's law, which, if you're unfamiliar with Ohm's law, you can do a quick Google search and you'll come up with a bunch of answers for it. But we're looking for resistance equals voltage supply subtract the voltage of the LED, and you take that total and divide it by the LED current. So we're going to need a whole list of specifications about the LED and our power supply. Now, the easiest way to do this is to look at the specifications of each die from the LED manufacturer or the place where you bought it. And you can do it this way. You can use the actual calculation, you can do the math yourself, but there's a far simpler way to do it, which is we're going to go back to Google, and I'm going to type in resistor, and I'm going to go down to resistor calculator. And as you can see, we have a whole bunch of different options, and I'm going to go down to this one here, led.linear1.org, LED calculator for single LEDs. I'm going to click on that, and as you can see, it comes up with this very simple diagram of a battery, a resistor, and the LED. And it's asking for three things: source voltage, diode forward voltage, and diode forward current listed in milliamps. Now this is the same information that the formula was calling for on the Plector Labs site, and all we have to do here is we just have to enter it in, and the website does the calculation for us. So in order to know what we're dealing with here, we need to know the specifications of the LED, and the easiest way to do that is by going to the customsabershop.com. Now you can type it all in. I have it saved up in my presets, and we're going to go down to Hilt Electronics, and then we're going to go to Cree Tri XP-E2 because that's the LED we're looking for. That's the LED we're using, and I'm going to go down to Custom Tri Cree LED. Now as you can see over on the side here, you have all your options for choosing your die when you order an LED. Now if you scroll down, you will see all of the specifications for each die. We have our ambers, our blues, our greens, our reds, and we're going to be focusing on the blues because that's what we're using. Now you can see we have a 45.7 minimum luminous flux at 350 milliamps. Forward voltage at 1000 milliamps equals 3.47 volts. A lot of people, when they see this diode forward current in milliamps, they automatically assume that it's this 350. It's actually not the 350. You're going to want to use the 1000 because it is, oops, I'm sorry, this one here, the 1000 with the 3.47 volts. So we go back, and our calculator is asking for a source voltage. Now the source voltage is the output of the pad or the battery, in our case the battery itself. So our battery will put out a 3.7. So I've already typed this in a few times, so just type in 3.7, that's the source voltage. Now it's also looking for the diode forward voltage. And if we go back to our spec sheet, we can see the forward voltage at 1000 milliamps is 3.47 for our blue die. So we can go ahead and we can type in 3.47. It's also looking for the diode forward current, which, as I said, is going to be 1000 milliamps. It's not going to be the 350, it's going to be the 1000 milliamps. So that's our forward current. 3.47 was our forward voltage. 1000 is our forward current. So then we can just go back and type in 1000, and then you simply enter find resistance. And it says this wizard recommends a 2 watt or greater 1 ohm resistor. So it is a 1 ohm 2 watt resistor that we're looking for a diode or LED with 3.47 forward voltage at 1000 milliamps with a 3.7 power supply. That is the resistor that we're going to want to use. Now since that is a single LED and we have 2 dies, we're going to want to use a single 1 ohm 2 watt resistor on each die of the LED. You can run a single power wire from the battery to a single resistor and then split off after the resistor and go to each die, but that will result in each die taking a fraction of this 1 ohms and 2 watts, and it may not be even. So in our case, we're going to keep things safe and to keep things as simple as possible, we're simply going to wire in line a single resistor to each die. Now the white die you can also do yourself. I'm going to reload. Oh, that didn't do what I wanted it to. We're just going to go ahead and clear this stuff out. Okay, so if we're doing the white die, we're going to scroll down here, and as you can see, we have the same specification sheet, except this time we have a forward voltage of 3.15 at 1000 milliamps. So we can go back and we can calculate the 3.7 is still the same. We still have the same amount of power because it's the same battery. Forward voltage is 3.15. and the forward current is still 1000. We can click find resistance, and we still get a 1 ohm 2 watt resistor. So that's a pretty common size for most of these LEDs. When you start getting into, say, your reds, your red orange, your ambers and things like that, they have a much lower voltage, so they're going to require higher resistance so you don't damage the LEDs. But for the white, I wouldn't even worry about putting a resistor on it, because the white is only going to be activated for a very short amount of time during each clash, so you're really not going to have the power necessary to damage the LED, because it's only going to be illuminated for such a short period of time. But we're going to use a 1 ohm 2 watt resistor on each LED. So now that we have the resistors figured out that we're going to use, let's head back to the bench and we'll install them in our saber. We know that we're going to need a 1 ohm 2 watt resistor, and we're going to use one for each of the 2 blue dies. The white die we're not really going to worry about, because as I said, the forward voltage of the white die is so close to the power supply voltage. You really don't have anything to worry about, and the fact that the white die is only activated for a split second at a time, I'm not really worried about it getting damaged at all. So when it comes to resistors, you have quite a few options you can choose from. This is a couple of 1 ohm 2 watt resistors from the custom saber shop. And as the online calculator said, you can see, it's hard to see, but at the very edge there's a brown tracer with a black and then 2 gold. That is the indicator for a 1 ohm 2 watt resistor. Now I like these ones for this particular build because they're very small. You can go with another company. This is another brand, but as you can see, they're much bigger. Now they're both the same exact thing. They're both 1 ohm 2 watt, but as you can see, the ones from the custom saber shop are much smaller. And in this build, in this chassis, our resistors are going to ride in this channel. And we can line these up, and we can actually put these in, and they're going to sit very, very well in this channel. And as you can see, they don't stick up too far. They have plenty of room to move. They're going to allow our other wires to go around them, and they're going to work out really well. We don't have to stagger them. So we're going to use these ones, and I'd recommend the ones from the custom saber shop. You can get these ones to work, but you might have to stagger them. You know, the end of this one is at the beginning of this one. That way, because if you try and line these up side by side, they're not going to fit in this channel at all. And you're going to probably damage the chassis trying to insert it, and we don't want to do that. So we're just going to use the ones from the custom saber shop. They're only a couple cents a piece. You can get them in bulk if you'd like. Does the same exact thing, same resistance, same everything. So we're going to use these, and I think it's going to work out pretty well. So like I said before, I want my resistors to end right about at the same point as this, maybe a little further back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out, I'm going to trim back just a little bit of the sheathing and find out which positive wire goes to the blues, and because we want to leave the white long, we don't need to cut that. So we're going to leave that a little long, and we're going to figure out where the blues need to go, and we will cut those back. So let me do that now. Okay, I've gone ahead and I've cut my 2 red wires, and I've marked my white one. I figured out which one was my flash on clash, and I just marked with a piece of electrical tape so that I know not to cut that one. And as you can see, I cut my 2 reds, and what I did was I took all my wires and I pulled them nice and tight, and I lined up. If my red wires are going to be soldered on right about there, you can see the green wires, the heat shrink comes right about to the end of this lead on the resistor. And I did that for a reason that we're going to see in a minute. But for now, we can go ahead and we can just solder on to these. Now these leads, I'm going to leave this side long for now. This side I'm going to cut just to the point where I need it. So I'm going to cut it to about, let's say about there. And then I'm going to strip the same amount off my wire. So, get rid of that little thing. Not that much. Line it up. Yeah, that'll work pretty well. I don't need the wire to go all the way up. So I might trim off just a hair more. There, that'll work pretty well. So what I'm going to do next is I have my heat shrink. I'm just going to measure that out. And it's going to go right up against that. And I just want it to go back a little bit further than the wire to give it some strength, give it some rigidity. I'm just going to cut it. Put the unused piece off to the side because we will be using it for the next one. And just test it out. Whoops, don't drop it. That'll work. So now I'm going to slide it over my wire. Make sure you do this first because as you can see, we don't have a way to slide it on after. So always make sure that you have your heat shrink on beforehand. I'm going to put the wire in my helping hands, in the helping hand of my helping hands. And like I said, these smaller ones are flat, so they don't damage the wire as much as the big ones. We can just angle this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-tin the tip of this wire with a little solder. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put my piece of paper back under here again, so that hopefully this will focus a little better on what I'm trying to look at. There we go. So, like I said, I'm just going to pre-tin this wire. Line this up a little bit. Just making good contact. Solder it right on. That's a good joint. Remove the helping hand. Give it a little tug, a little twist, a little tug. Nice and strong. That is a very good solder joint. So I'll slide the heat shrink over. Take my heat gun. Again, just a low setting will work. You don't need anything too hot. It's hard to see because that's really small heat shrink, but it shrunk right up. I mean, it might go a little, it's a little loose actually. Go a little more. There, that's tighter. Alright. So that is one. So I'm going to go ahead and just do the other one real quick, and then we'll solder them together. Okay, I've gone ahead and soldered on my other resistor, and I also retwisted these together, so the twist ends right before the resistors. That way it just keeps it a little neater and tidier. And I'm not sure if you can tell, but what I also did was I bent the leads. As I said, I left the leads on the other end of the resistor long, and I bent them on both of them, because what I'm going to do, with a little trick, I'm not sure if it's recommended, I know it works, and I know it's not going to hurt anything, is when I put these together, these leads are going to touch. That's why I've bent them. As you can see, if we line these up a little better, they're going to touch just like that. They're going to come together, and we're actually going to solder our white wire. It still has the tape on it, and we're going to solder that right to it, right about here. And then from there, we're going to cut this off, and we're going to just solder one wire coming from these that's going to go to our board. So you can just take these, push the two LEDs together, the resistors together, and you can just bend the leads so they touch. Careful not to break them off. You can just bend them together, and that way you don't have to do one coming out with like one wire and then solder this wire to those wires, and then have another wire coming out that you have to solder those three wires to. This will work just a lot better. It'll save space, and in this build you're really trying to save space. It doesn't matter if the two resistors are touching, because it's the same principle as it would be. They're all coming from one pad, they're all coming from one power supply, so power is coming in, and whether these two leads are touching or whether it's two wires or whatever, it doesn't matter. Power is still coming in, then it separates out through the two, goes through the resistors, and then goes to each die on the LED. So you can solder these together. It's the same thing. We're just eliminating the middleman and saving ourselves some space. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and that might take just a second, but you understand the principle. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and we'll be right back after I do. Okay, as you can see, I have my two prongs cut and soldered together, and I have my red wire for my flash on clash die soldered to it, and that is a nice strong solder joint. So now what we can do is we can take this and put it in the helping hands. I'm going to get rid of that one. And that's the other great thing about these ones, is they're great to use so they don't damage wire, but they just pop out so easily because they're just held in place with the regular ones. So I'm just going to clamp that in there. And I'm going to put this in this side so it stays nice and sturdy. And then I'm going to get just a little, I have a scrap piece of red wire here, just a short one, we don't need anything too long, and I'm going to strip back some wire, or some sheathing I should say, about that much, about, I don't know, 1/4 inch. Yeah, I think that'll work very nicely. Put that in the helping hands. Give it a little twist. I'm just going to tin that up. Just like that. Now I'm just going to lay this across. It's really difficult for you to see that because it's not focusing on the wire. Let's see if I can fix that. There, that's a little better. That's not bad. A little big, but it's definitely a sturdy joint. It's not a cold solder or anything like that. So I like it. What I'm going to do now is take just another piece of heat shrink. I might use this next size up because I don't think my black black's gonna fit over that solder joint because those leads from the resistors are kind of big, and no, as we can see, the black's not really gonna fit. It's a little snug, so I'm just gonna take the next size up. You know what, with this green, since it is a bigger diameter, we can probably go a little further up and we'll be fine. Let's just get a longer piece here, and we're just gonna go right up to the end of the resistors. That way everything is nice and covered. I think that'll work a little better. We'll just shrink that up. Okay, we have our solder joint all nice and protected. So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to do something a little unconventional. And I just want to keep all of this nice and neat, nice and a little more secure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some small clear heat shrink, and I'm going to slide it over. And I'm going to heat shrink this whole thing together, just to make sure that it's nice and protected. Make sure that nothing's going to move or anything like that. Keep my resistors nice and secure. Camera will focus. There it is. I'm going to slide this over, and I like the clear because it allows me to be able to see everything in there, to make sure that I don't know, I just like to be able to see what's in it. So there, as you can see, it's nice and shrunk. Everything inside is nice and secure. That'll keep it from, you know, if you were planning on dueling with it and it's taking any hits, this will keep it from, the resistors from bouncing around, keep those solder joints a little more secure. And I think that's going to work out pretty well. And if we look, the end of our joint is a little further back than the one for our green, but that's not really going to matter much at all. But that about does it for the soldering of the LED. So now we can just do a quick test and we can line this up. You can see that our resistor is going to sit right about back here. Our red single wire to our board is going to come out, and our LED, our board is going to sit right about there. Slide this in. As I've said many times, we're going to solder the board with the chassis hanging out about like that. The LED wire will come out and go to the board. All three of these will go to the board. And then when we slide this together, these wires will bunch up and slide this way, and our red wire with our resistors will sit right about there, hopefully, which when this inner chassis is fully inserted, our wire should ride right at the end of this channel, which is right where we want it. And as we can see, even with the heat shrink and everything on there, and these butted up side by side, we can see that our resistors sit nicely in that channel, and we still have plenty of room for other wires to go around it. We can fit a couple wires probably on top, and it's going to work out very, very well. If we had used, like I said, if we'd used these bigger ones, this channel gets really, really tight on space, and I'm not sure how well it would have worked. But doing it this way with the ones from the Custom Saber shop, it's going to work out perfectly. So as of right now, we have our entire LED wired. We have our resistors in place, and what we can do is, just for ha-has, just for fun, to test everything, make sure it still works, we can strip back just a little bit. We still have our two negatives stripped a little bit. Well, actually we don't have the green, we can do the green too. We can take our test pack, we can put the positive to the single positive now, which, as we know, is tied to all three. So now we have one positive wire going to all three. So now we can put our red right on the wire. We can take our black and we can go to our single green LED, because as I said, I soldered them both the the blue leads together into one. That's going to go to the board, and we can go ahead and test that. So I'm going to get my LED, and boom. It's hard to see on camera, but there are actually two LEDs, left and right, are both lighting up. So that means that our blues are good. So we can keep our positive attached, because that goes to all three. We can just get our purple, which I have designated for flash on clash, Again, you can choose any color you want to. I just for some reason chose purple, and we can just connect that one, and there's our white. So now we know that all of our LEDs work, all the soldering is good, everything works, and it's like I said before, it's always good to test multiple times throughout. It's good to test the LED before you solder any wires to it, right when you get it from wherever you got it from, whether it be the Custom Saber Shop or Saber Bay, wherever you get the LED from, you should test it right when you get it to make sure that it works, and you should test it every step of the way. When you solder some wires onto it, test it. When you solder your resistors on, test it. When you solder the two, anything, anytime you do anything, you should test it, because if it worked before and then you do one step and now it doesn't work, you know that it was that one step that did it. If you do 10 steps and then test it and it doesn't work, you don't know what you did wrong that caused it not to work. So now you have to go all the way back to the beginning to figure out what you did wrong. So that is how you assemble your LED. That is how you choose your resistors as the tutorial for doing it online, and that is how you solder in your resistors into the circuit. That's just my way. As I said, you don't have to use this heat shrink. You don't have to do it side by side. You don't have to solder them all into one wire. It just makes things a lot easier. As I've said many times, I don't know if this is the right way. I don't know if it's I know it's not the wrong way. I know that what I'm showing you is not the wrong way to do it. But whether or not it's the preferred way, everybody has their method. There's more than one way to skin a cat. So if you want to use this way, that's perfectly fine. I implore you to. But that will do it for the LED. So thank you for watching another episode of Let's Build a Graflex. Come back next time where we modify our Graflex clamp so that one, the handle can spin. As you can see, this handle doesn't spin unless you pinch this. Then you can spin it, but we're going to make it so this spins all the time. We are also going to install a strip of Mylar tape around the band of the clamp because we're making it a Empire Strikes Back accurate Graflex. And we're also going to be soldering onto our Graflex clamp switch, and we are going to be just painting this so you're not going to see it when it's in the clamp. I'm just going to spray paint it, and we're going to install this, and then we're going to I'll show you how to route it through the chassis. So stay tuned for the next episode of Let's Build a Graflex. Thanks for watching.